Hi, everyone. How nice. Thank you for joining. This is not only the last panel, but actually the end of the assembly. I know, very sad. And as we walk out of here, the post-assembly will start. And I thought that this would be a nice moment to kind of zoom out a little bit. Look at what is this ecosystem? What is this autonomous worlds thing? What can we pull from, maybe from experience, and say, this looks like some other things I've seen before. And can that help us to kind of see the potentials, but also the risks that are in this moment? And I think that would be a great thing to end on. And I think will add a lot of value to everyone in this room who's really tried to solve this thing at this point. So we will talk about three things mainly. We'll talk about the ecosystem. We will talk about unlocks, which is a different word for affordances, and then talk about like infrastructure, or what does an ecosystem actually need, and do we have everything we need in this ecosystem to actually make this happen? And I'm here to facilitate. Jump in at any point, interrupt me. I'm sure you all have a lot to talk about. And let's go. So the first question is, maybe we go one by one, and then I will ask to you specifically. I will start with Hilmar, maybe. If you look at the autonomous worlds ecosystem right now, does it remind you of something? What do you think of it? Is there like a specific thing you see that you want to pull out?
So if I look at the scene in the form of this, it's almost one-to-one to the Finnish demo scene, where people were crafting visual experiences in very small constraints, like be it like 4K or 1K, or it's absurd what people can do in that space. And it's like that was born out of, well, there was a constraint. The mainly Commodore 64 just could only do so much, and people were competing in how much you could do within the capabilities of the Commodore 64. And people really liked doing it. And then computers became more and more powerful. Now 4K is like a window on a spaceship in Evaline. But they kept the constraint. So they kept trying to fit a game or a graphical demo or a music video, God knows what, into 4K. So when I started to go to blockchain game conferences, I think I went to the first one. You were there, Rafael?
Yeah,
Leon 18. Yeah,
2018.
Yeah, 2018. I was fascinated with this rigor on like making a game or making an economy within these, in many ways, absurd constraints. And then I went to some more, because some of the best thinking I saw on game economies, which, by the way, game economies are usually not really economies. They're single-player unlock progression systems for the most part, maybe with gifting. There's no on-bed rating. The most games are not like Game Online. So then you have these like absurd constraints of counting not like memory, but I guess gas opcodes. And the fact that you're in an adversarial environment where nothing is going to work ever, and it's hyper-financialized on top of it. It's like, wow, this is like the Finnish demo scene. Like, you've like picked an absurdly obscure, weird constraints, and you stack them all together, and now you're going to try to make an impossible thing on top of it, which is making a game. Like, okay, wow.
So
this is some blood sport.
I have a question about that. So it sounds to me like you came for the financialization, because you saw some sort of correlations between what was going on in EVE and the financialization of that, and blockchain does a lot of that stuff too. But is that why you're still here?
So I think finalization is maybe not like an accurate term. When I saw this, I saw like, oh my God, this is an MMO. If you look at the different blockchain tribes and what they say on their forums, they're just like MMOs. This is like an MMO without a gameplay loop. And I was like, oh my God, this is like way easier. I don't have to actually make an MMO. I just like make a coin and have people arguing about the value of the coin. Like, wow. Okay. So But then I figured out, okay, it came out of the constraints. You could really just do this. You could really just make a coin and have people argue about it. And then, I mean, more things came along and more things came along. And now there's a lot coming along, but the constraints are still super tight. So if you go back to the Finnish demo scene, I mean, almost incepts all of hardware acceleration, driver making. Like, if you're making anything in graphics, any graphics company has an outpost in Finland. And why is that? Well, Finland only has 5 million people. It's because of the Finnish demo scene. And this is like that. So if you then draw kind of takeaways from that, like there were a whole industry spawned out of people that became skilled and fitting within these constraints. Because then there's constraints, they went away. So as the blockchain scale, as the libraries are better, as the AI just auto-generate games and whatnot, I think you people will be picking the constraints you have today, and the game will kind of be demo scenes games, because now that we have all this massive affordances, now it's so easy. Like, where is the blood sport of game making? Like, this is it.
I like the idea of a group of like hardcore autonomous worlds creators or game designers staying in like the most constrained environment, and like everyone else is a sellout, you know, everyone else over like 1 million gas, you know, just abandon the principles, and we're the only purists left, like in like 10 years.
Yeah. Maybe the two of you have similar like perspectives on the ecosystem as a scene as it is today.
Yeah, I'll sort of map it to... So I've been making games for a long time, and I remember 8-bit went to 16-bit, 3D, internet multiplayer, and each time there was some sort of technical unlock, you know, mobile games, the Wii, all of these create a new kind of game and introduce a new market. And I feel like this is it's usually brought on by technology of some kind. And this is a technology that I could see leading to a new kind of game. What's weird about it is that we're in a really weird time in the games industry where usually these things come along every like 5 years, and it's been 10 years since anything interesting has come along. So we're at a really odd point in time in the games industry where nothing interesting's happened for a decade. And so will it be this? I hope so. It could be something else, but it's definitely overdue.
Examples of previous of those unlocks, like multiplayer will be one of them?
Yeah, multiplayer, and, you know, the biggest one, you could maybe say 10 years ago, well, the App Store was massive. I mean, that added on, the games that came from that added on, you know, 3 billion players and put $100 billion to the games industry. So that was enormous. That was the last really big one, mobile free-to-play. So sometimes it's about business models, sometimes it's about hardware. It's just weird that nothing's happened for so long.
I like that you talked about business models. I'm going to be a bit corporate now. Sorry, everyone. I know it's a punk rock scene, but so there is, in parallel to all that evolution of the technology, there is necessarily an evolution of the markets, and there is an evolution of the way games are played and the way games are businesses, right? And when we ask like what is missing in the ecosystem, there is this validation, the need of this validation of this is actually an industry, and not necessarily, we're going to be as big as mobile games. Doesn't have to be that, but actually being a sustainable revenue source where you can actually have companies running with a clear audience that returns, that's retained, and, you know, all those things with proper engagement. Doesn't mean that like we have to go down the road through the capitalistic crazy thing, because we also know that going down the road with the capitalistic crazy thing, coin goes up, it kind of blows up in people's faces, as we have seen in every cycle. So to talk about like these business models, I see a clear evolution of business models over gaming, and the business model, the way the game is paid for, the way game generates revenue, defines the medium, defines the game design. So you can clearly look at arcade games, session-based, 3 minutes, pay for that little amount of time, the whole game lasts 20 minutes. It has one logic. There was a lot of multiplayer there. Console games that last 10 to 100 hours, paid upfront, so you gotta give the player like what he paid for. You have subscription things that comes mainly with the internet, MMOs, that's very good for that. Then you have the mobile, and the mobile with the very fragmented short session logic of consumption gave birth to a very specific kind of design and microtransactions and season and all those things, right? So I don't think that we could lean on any of those with the methods that we have, with the constraints that we have. We have to make something up. And I dare to say it's not minting a coin or airdropping shit, but yeah.
It seems, I mean, there's always this balance, right? You wanna leave enough room for free experimentation that is not constrained by a business model, but at the same time, as from an industry perspective, the thing needs to validate itself as a functional kind of thing that is not only funded by the system promises, but rather also validates, the consumer to spend on it, which then validates more development. And the balancing between that in a scene this early is really hard. Because, you suffocate it if you do it too early, and if you do it too late, it could fall forward. You disagree? Okay. Tell us.
Mods. I think that this scene is way more, this space, the fundamental, unlocks or affordances are way better suited for giving a true life to mods than actual games. Like on my presentation just before, I talked about, honestly, Fortnite, Counter-Strike, Dota, League of Legends, those are all mods. Roblox is a mod machine, right? Those are some of the biggest games we have today. All of those mods, they were created by small teams, inventing and creating on top of something that existed. And immediately as they got traction, they got a market, they got some audience, they were bought. And that they had no choice because they either would be bought or they would be basically killed, right? Because the other team had the control. In our space, that doesn't have to happen. The mods can just go on forever and become their own games and take over the base game. I think that's pretty cool.
I mean, we're jumping straight ahead, but this is great. So no, I think it's good. I mean, there's no structure. I said this earlier, so I think that if when we're talking about specific affordances, I kind of have you kind of as unfair maybe, but caricatures of the three approaches, and you will probably all have different takes on them. But in the recent piece in Rock Paper Scissors, Hilmar, you talk a lot about persistence as one of the main affordances. Playment basically has composability written on its forehead, so I have you down as that. And you definitely have spoken a lot about modability in all our conversations. So maybe a kind of, do we see these as coexisting? Do we see these as step functions towards the whole thing? Which is the first one that will probably manifest? Is there a reason you're choosing persistence as the first thing to communicate about the affordances? I think we have this kind of smorgasbord or availability of these things now. How should we approach them? Which one to choose first? Are they all going to be integrated, or are we going to see specializations within the specific things that this unlocks?
Good. All right, I'm going to start with I'm going to pull out of your question a little bit and do a tale of caution and talk about the biggest mistake of my career. So about, 2005, something like that, I was running a PlayStation studio, and we had the number one PlayStation game, and we're doing well with that. And mobile came out, so 2008. And I thought, great, okay, I can put games on. It's tons of handsets in the world now. I can put my games on a mobile phone. And you were starting to see, not Flappy Bird, but Flappy Bird style games. And I go, well, big boys are here now. We're going to put I think we can get our PlayStation games to work on an iPhone. It's going to blow everyone away. We've got the best engineers. We've got hit games. It's going to be amazing. And so we spent a while, it was not a small effort to try and get a PlayStation game. This is like PlayStation 3 to get it to run on an iPhone. And we spent a year or so doing it, put it out, and of course nobody cared. It was I couldn't understand what was going on. Why are you still playing Flappy Bird? Have you not seen my game? It's amazing. It's like a PlayStation. And of course it was completely the wrong kind of game. I was taking the ideas that I was familiar with over here, and that I thought was important, and my existing audience thought were important, and tried to map it to a whole new medium. It's so obvious that was a mistake now, but I spent 2 years, and I killed the company, by the way, trying to do that, trying to make an old game fit with a new medium. And I think whether it's composability or longevity or whatever it is, I think the most important thing is don't just try and do the thing that already exists. Try and do something that's brand new and absolutely fits the medium. God, shoot me now if the best thing that we come up with in 5 years is some variation on what we already have. That would be a huge disappointment to me.
Yeah, it also seems like the legitimacy craving that crypto has because of its, let's say, somewhat murky past, opens a risk for trying to be legitimate by imitating the legitimate industries that are gaming and therefore losing any kind of novelty in the proposal it actually has. Does anyone else specifically around approaches?
Okay, so you are kind of putting me on persistency, I guess. So, we want Eve forever is the vision of the company. And if you are to be serious about that, the biggest risk factor to that are human lifespans and company lifespans. Not every company is like Nintendo has been making, I guess, games. They were selling play cards to casinos. It actually is a little bit like chain games, like play cards to casinos for 200 years. But they are an outlier. CCP is 30 years old and we're ancient by game standards. So companies are just not very likely to survive for very long. But products and ideas can survive for very long. We have concrete things like the pyramid or the Great Wall of China or the Bible or Elvis Presley. The myth of him like being alive is he's alive because of the myth is alive. And then if we kind of pick that apart truly forever, persistency then becomes a key feature. And I think the whole premise of blockchains to begin with is to be about persistency, that they will persist, that a decentralized system is a better way to have things persist. And in that particular article, we were obviously celebrating 20 years of Eve, was talking a lot about longevity and persistency. So I was really calling that out. And I was referring to like probably the best way to store information is to write with blood on calf skin, because we still have books that were written that way in Iceland 1,000 years ago, and they're very readable still. They're even like Icelandic people can just read them. And a USB key is not a good way. A CD-ROM is not a good way. Okay, blood on calf skin. Okay, is that the ultimate persistent state of like somebody is putting the ledger on blood and calf skin as a way to persist? So that's why I was focusing on that, and there was more about this ever concept. So the technical problem in that is about like is the game or its state gonna persist forever? That's kind of Maslow hierarchy of needs number one. But I do think what is the more important one is what I was talking about in my talk. Somebody has to care about it forever, and that has to be, then the game has to be generational. Like it really have to think about it like that. So one of the things that are interesting about this is that it's a credible path to foreverness.
I think it's really interesting how the space has this problem that most of the affordances come out after you care. Like it doesn't, like we haven't found good ways to integrate it into the game loop itself yet. Most of the affordances that we're talking about, persistence, composability, modability, are things that happen after you care about the game. It's like a security-based assumption or a security-based conviction, which most people only care about after they've been hacked. I only care about the persistence of a world after I either care about it or I've been part of a world that has disappeared. I care about composability when something gets shut down that I can no longer access, and modability when the mod gets killed by the game creator, right? So like a huge task for that is that if we can't articulate the affordances within the gameplay itself, and you have a huge advantage there because people already care about your game, if we can't find a way to integrate those into the game loop itself, then we always need to convince people about a carrot, use a carrot of the system or the promise of the thing that they will get by this rather than the game itself. What's your approach to this, especially the two of you who are developing new games?
Euro as well, but there is an existing world. What is your approach to approaching that problem? Do you want to integrate the affordance into the gameplay loop directly, or do you think that the affordance will really come out once the gameplay loop has players playing and it has that's the next step of it?
I'm not sure I understand the question exactly, but because I don't think those are separable things. I think it goes back to the point that I was making, like the medium defines so much things on the game. So just to go back to the mobile thing, right? And in resonance what David said is like, it is a new kind of user with going very specific on mobile that now is established industry, right? It had its own type of games. So games that were working on console didn't work. There were games that worked on console that ended up doing really well on mobiles, right? They were like little puzzle games, right? They worked really fine. And we had those in consoles. We just have to find what are the characteristics of gameplay, of the loop, that will fit well in this new space. The short sessions that we also had in the arcade games, they kind of come back in the mobile, right? So you start to take these ingredients of other, cuisines, and then you make this fusion dish to fit this new thing. And most importantly for the mobile thing, just to use that as an example again, is an entire new market that was unlocked. Because it's not the same people who were playing consoles or who were playing WoW that suddenly stopped that and said, now I'm going to play, mobile games. Still, most of the mobile gamers were very, hardcore. They don't identify themselves as gamers, which is really crazy because they think that gamers are people who are playing like pew pew and, slash games. But to go back to our point, sorry, those affordances, those unlocks, those like basic things, they are embedded into they have to be embedded in the game loop, right? It's like making an MMO that, you only reach online like after a while. I think some do, but that's not really smart because you don't have your full core loop if you're not showing the whole system or, exploring or using everything that the new medium can give. So I would also put I don't like the word financialization, but Hilmar touched that point, is that EVE has a real economy where trade is free. That is a huge difference from 99% of games. And that is something that you cannot really escape on blockchain. So you have to respect that too. Not only, composability and the other things.
I'll add something to that, which is in the small brain talk, I'm paraphrasing a bit, but I sort of got from it, which is think about it, but also relax about it a bit, like just try stuff out. And I personally get anxious about what new affordances and how we executing them in our game, partly because I have this vision of people in the games industry tapping me on the shoulder and say, well, you could have done that without a blockchain. But I need to sort of get over that, I think. And also a recognition that, let's compare it with mobile that I was talking about. And it took 4 years to go from App Store to, Candy Crush, Clash of Clans era. And there was lots of sort of things that edged us toward that. It wasn't like you went from there to there immediately. But I'm also pointing out that it took 4 years before people really figured out what that was and all the aspects of it. So I think, keep trying to break new ground, try things out. But equally, I think I'm probably a bit guilty of getting hung up on the affordances and making sure that we deliver on every aspect of,
So a little bit about this kind of format of games. And I think this might actually be helpful. So when you think of like mobile, console, PC, VR, the games that are successful on each of these type of platforms are very different, and they're different because the interaction pattern is different. So how you interact with the game is what determines what kind of game will be good. If you're interacting with your finger on a screen, you get an Angry Birds. And Angry Birds is really the first mobile game, and it in many ways is the best mobile game. It is a deeply mobile game. You only on a touch screen does this make sense. If you try to play Angry Birds with a mouse, with a keyboard, with a controller, it just isn't the same. It's far from being the same. Same with keyboard and mouse. EVE is a keyboard and mouse game, and FPSs are keyboard and mouse games. There's something deep about the wrist. And when they were trying to move FPSs over to consoles, it's terrible to use your thumb to control the character and the gun at the same time. It is frankly shocking why FPSs are still
Until Halo.
Yeah, but they have and then auto aim and like sensitivity things. They've added like a practical AI to help you to aim with your little finger instead of your wrist with a mouse. So and when we were doing VR, we did a few VR games. It was kind of that was deeply uncomfortable to make a VR game because none of the patterns work. I mean, at least with a touchscreen, you can kind of relate to something. But when you're in VR, it's just it's in many ways so magical. So we just had to. We were isolating these small verbs, like what's a little verb fragment of an interaction that we can turn into a little game. Did one game, Gunjack, which was kind of like Space Invaders. You were kind of shooting with your eyes, moving with your head. Okay, you can make a game out of that. And there were always people asking us, "Oh, why don't you make an MMO for VR?" It's just like I don't have enough verbs to make an MMO.
So let me interrupt. Why? How do you map that to autonomous worlds or on-chain games?
Yeah. So then you have to think. Okay, this is generally how gameplay works. Think about how you interact and how you come back to it. Are you using your finger or using a keyboard or mouse? This determines what the gameplay is. And then, okay, when you think about, like, this is ultimately a back-end technology, if you think about it like that. And then you have to think, okay, what does this give you? And that's why I start with persistency. It's like you're making a persistent world. Like at the heart of it, you're making a persistent world. And so if you're not doing that, you're making a persistent world. And again, FPSs are not really persistent worlds. Angry Birds is not a persistent world. Most games are not persistent worlds. So you have to start with, you're making a persistent world. Then, okay, what are persistent worlds and what makes them interesting? Why were people playing MUDs? Why are people playing EVE Online? Why were people playing Ultima? So you have to start from that end. And then you have to think about, okay, what's an interesting front-end gameplay to that? And then you go into, are you making a mobile persistent world? Are you making a VR persistent world?
What's interesting, many things about what you said were interesting, but like one thing that stood out to me when we were talking about the different interaction patterns is that we don't really have one, right? The uniqueness of this technology is the front-end agnosticism. You know, anyone can interact with the system through any whatever front end you want, which could be a mobile phone or could be a desktop or could be, I don't know, VR. Maybe that is the key affordance. If we're talking about key interaction pattern, is that it's the absence of a strictly controlled interaction pattern.
It's agnostic of any particular client. Is that what you mean? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but as it's a different kind of technology, like we can look at the phone with the touch screen as a very specific hardware I/O kind of change, like human interface change. You can look at the internet as a very different change, right? Like there were multiplayer games before the internet, but multiplayer game, like an RPG plus internet makes an MMO. And an MMO can happen on a console, it can happen on a phone, it can happen anywhere. Like, and technically, Eve is to a certain extent client agnostic. The client is just a thing that allows you to talk to the server, right? So the internet doesn't have a clear, human interface. It's just another thing that you plug in. 3D graphics, right? There was a time when games were not 3D. Nintendo 64 came out. Nobody knew how to do 3D. If you play Mario 64, it's the weirdest camera control ever. And it's really good. And they were kind of like laying the groundwork. Now it's completely different the way you control a camera. Even the gamepad is different to allow you to better interact in a 3D simulation. But what Nintendo did is just fantastic if you think about that at the time, right? But Nintendo, they always do good stuff, right? So I don't know. I think it's not, you don't have to be that literal, right? To the fact that like, oh, am I clicking? Am I dragging? Am I doing this? It's what Hilmar said, right? There is persistency. There is going to be trading between the players as like autonomous entities, right? So you don't control your entire economy. You have to look at sinks and faucets in a larger way. There will be fuckery that will happen in your interactions because people are going to go tap the smart contracts directly and bypass your client, right? You got to just be aware of those things, and that's kind of the field you're playing in. Then within that, you do whatever the hell you want.
So I think, I mean, there's a useful thing there. Okay, there was the internet. We got online games or multiplayer games. Most of them were not persistent because it's very hard to make them persist. Again, even as an outlier, both that people care about it and that it is like that. So this is adding persistency to the internet. It's then adding programmability to the internet, which is another element maybe you haven't talked a lot about. But that's also valuable as per the modding. It already happens. People want it. They want to change the game. This is like, you can now mod an MMO, not just the front end, but also the back end. It's kind of what we are going for. I mean, even if we talk about the persistency, it's more like a hierarchy of needs. So, and that's it, I think. Like, and then you have to make a game that is interesting in that context of it being obviously multiplayer because it's on the internet. I think obviously persistent because this whole thing is about persistency. Obviously about like, you can now mod the server, not just the client. And I think that's just it. The rest after that is just like, it's damn fucking hard to make a game. So good luck with that. Like you picked a pretty like tough arena and you put the finished demo scene constraints on yourselves additionally. So you're like trying to thread 5 needles.
Yeah, but the counter to that, and anybody hoping that this is like a step into the world of the video game industry, don't go there. It's like absolute bloodbath in a minute. So it is really tough, what you're saying, which is like trying to build a new kind of game for a market that doesn't exist yet. That's a really almost suicidal thing to do. However,
sorry if I interrupt, because I'm going to make another point about that, where you remind me of the finished demo scene. Nobody cared. Like, nobody cared that there were no consumers for the demos, or like there was no business model about making demos. The Finns, they genuinely don't care, and they did some of the best work ever done in games for shits and giggles, and sauna. So, like, and I definitely get that vibe here, whether it's big or small, whether somebody cares, and whatever. These people seem to care, just like the Finnish demo scene care. So, like, rock that the fuck out. Like, as the meme goes, we're here just old man yelling at clouds. Like, who cares about that? I mean, okay, how much money can you make? How big is the market? How many billions of people are going to come? And like, who fucking cares? Like, that's a cool game. It's a cool demo. That's how the Finns created the entirety of the 3D graphics industry. Just like fucking around. And some sauna.
This is just what we're doing here collectively is just so much more interesting than what's going on in the rest of the games industry. It would be, and it's a bloodbath there. Doesn't matter if you're making console or mobile or indie or whatever it is, like everybody's having a hard time. And the stuff that's going on here is just magical. And yeah, we got a bunch of technical constraints and we don't even know what we're building half the time. But trust me, it's so much more interesting. So, you know, stay here. This is fun.
Well, I think that is a good time to end this assembly and move on to the post-assembly.
Thank you all three.
Thank you.